Hi, I'm Mandy Medley, and I'm one of the workers and co-owners at Pilsen Community Books, a worker cooperative and independent bookstore here in the beloved Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago. And I'm so excited to welcome Marisel Vera and Alyssa Vera Ramos here tonight in celebration of Marisel's newest book, The Taste of Sugar. Here it is. A couple of notes about how this evening will go. First, Marisel will read, and then Marisel and Alisa will be in conversation. And then afterwards, there'll be time for a short Q&A. So if you have any questions at all during the event, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll get to them at the appropriate time. You can also buy The Taste of Sugar with signed book plates. They're really beautiful on our website at pilsencommunitybooks.com, as well as If I Bring You Roses, her first book. And we really thank you for supporting the author tonight, as well as great free programming. And now, without further ado, I'll introduce. Marisel Vera is a Chicago writer based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Through her work, Vera explores the particular burdens that Puerto Ricans on the island and in the diaspora carry as colonial subjects of the most powerful country in the world. Her latest novel, The Taste of Sugar, which was recently named one of the 50 notable books of fiction in 2020 by the Washington Post, very exciting, is a tale of love and endurance on the eve of the Spanish-American War, told through two Puerto Rican families. Vera is the author of If I Bring You Roses, a story about a Puerto Rican couple who moved to the United States during 1950s Operation Bootstrap to chase the American dream in Chicago's factories. Vera is currently at work on a novel about four Puerto Rican girls growing up in 1970s Chicago with the working title The Girls from Humboldt Park. I look forward to that one as well. And Alyssa Vera Ramos is a theater maker, space holder, director, and culture worker dedicated to dreaming a liberated world and practicing living into that world every chance we get. Over the past decade, she has directed, devised, and co-written many plays and workshops for many audiences throughout Chicago, with tours to Austin, New Orleans, and more. Alisa is the artistic director of For Youth Inquiry Performance Company, housed the Illinois Caucus for Adolescent Health, and creating original participatory theater experiences to support the sexual health, rights, and identities of young people. She was also a founding member of Femmes of Color Artistic Collective, Femelanin, documented in the Ensemble Made Chicago and featured at the LTC Sin Fronteras TYA Festival, and an organizer of Swarm Artist Residency, where she focuses on curating healing and racial justice experiences for Midwestern-based artists. Upcoming work includes an epic play created with Marisel here tonight, You Can't Cover the Sky with Your Hands, threaded with ancestral memory, satire, and bomba. You Can't Cover the Sky with Your Hands charts the history of sterilization, forced and without consent, birth control trials, and other reproductive oppression by the state, both U.S. and Puerto Rico, that Puerto Rican women have endured. And now I'll turn it over to Marisel.
Hi, thank you for joining us tonight. I am going to read a section from the female protagonist, Valentina Sanchez, and then later from Vicente Vega. Chapter 2, French Mademoiselles, circa 1889. Before Valentina Sanchez met Vicente Vega, she was just a girl wishing for romance and adventure, like in the French novels she loved. Her best friend, the wealthy Dalia, was to marry the Spanish caballero she'd met in Paris on a visit to a new exhibit called the Eiffel Tower. At night, it was lit by gaslight. It reached the clouds, Valentina. Valentina feared that the closest she would ever get to the Eiffel Tower was a drawing Dalia had sketched on the back of a missile. In the tiny bedroom of her parents' small house in Ponce, Valentina woke to the woodpecker's tap on a tree, to the footsteps of the tradespeople walking to La Plaza to sell their wares. The slant of morning sun sneaked in through the shuttered windows and caught her in the mosquito netting draped over her bed. Mommy told her daughters not to complain because there were no trips abroad or fans of peacock feathers. Valentina and her sister Elena had food to eat, didn't they? They slept in beds with mosquito netting and not in doorways, didn't they? Did they notice the mother and her naked children sleeping on the steps of the Alcaldía? Not even the mayor would help them. He said that he couldn't because tax money went first to Spain, and then there was a town sanitation, and on top of that, he had to pay the salaries of administrators, and then, bueno, always something. Listen to me, muchachas. Count your blessings like raindrops. Valentina's hometown of Ponce was a city of the very rich and the very poor, including many former slaves. Mostly the poor worked for the rich in their grand houses. But there was also a tiny middle class to which Valentina's family belonged, mainly due to the family's connections on her mother's side, something that Mama reminded her husband as often as she deemed necessary. Mama was always economizando. She made do with a single servant, and a woman came just once a week to scrub the floors while she stood over her, supervising. Valentina's mother went daily to the market, cooked most of the meals, and mended the family's clothing with their daughter's help. La lavandera Claudia La Negra came with her children to collect the family's dirty laundry. The littlest child of 4 years carried a bundle of towels on her head with the care of an experienced laundress. Valentina had once heard her mother say that she didn't know how one person could eat, let alone feed a family, on the earnings of a laundress. Everywhere they saw the indignities and tragedies that came from lack of money. When the girls accompanied their mother to the cemetery to say prayers at the graves of dead relatives, they often saw silent funeral processions of barefoot men carrying a plain three-sided wood box, balanced on long poles like a crude hammock, a black cloth thrown over the cadaver. The grave diggers would flip the coffin over a newly empty grave and dump the pauper's body head first. Beyond the marble mausoleums decorated with exquisite French porcelain roses, Elena led Valentina to an area surrounded by a wall of stone. Valentina, see over there? That's for los pobres. It's la huesera, the boneyard, where the skeletons are tossed to make room for more muertos. Chapter 3, Boyhood, circa 1880. Sometimes in whispers, Vicente and his brother Luisito called their father Raúl Vega El General. His father's temper was infamous throughout the countryside. He often overheard people say that Raúl Vega tenía mal genio o un carácter fuerte. So whenever El General inflicted scorn that scarred their skin like the slash of the whip, his older brother's eyes bore into his, say nothing. Raúl Vega had taught his sons that the way to know coffee was with your hands and your feet. When Vicente and Luisito were children, their father had set them under a bush to pick coffee berries. Vicente hadn't dared to complain about the mosquitoes and other insects that flew into his eyes and stuffed themselves up his nose. Evil branches scratched his face and tried to thwart his picking. He dreamt of trees. When a tree asked if he were a bird, Vicente observed the ghostiness of the moon, free to come and go as it pleased. Vicente whispered, "I am the moon bird." The tree whispered cuentos that the birds had brought back from other lands, tales of riches and pirates and oceans longer than days. A tree complained about the owl that kept it awake each night. Why didn't it fly down the mountain and bother those trees? The coffee trees wished that their taller cousins, the banana and plantain and guava trees, wouldn't hog up all the sunlight, because they too wanted to bask in the sun. There was the eagle that perched on the crown of a tree with such delicacy. The swish of its massive wings as it flew away woke Vicente from his dream. Even Raúl Vega admitted that Vicente had the gift. Vicente's fingers need only touch the coffee berry for it to drop into his palm. He didn't mind that the berries didn't ripen all at once, and that the trees must be picked over and over again throughout the harvest. He told the trees, "Your berries will be washed and dried and roasted to make coffee so delicious that it is a drink for the gods. Mere mortals will pay for it in gold and silver. Your berries will become coffee beans that will be transported in ships to faraway places I could never hope to see in this life or the next. Your berries will be transformed into coffee that will be served in the palaces of the most important people in the world, the kings and queens and popes. Your coffee will kiss the lips of the most beautiful señoritas and be served in cafes to idle people who will linger over tiny cups, bewitched. There are people in the world who could never live a day without you. Vicente never shared with others his conversations with the coffee trees. It wasn't because he thought his brother Luisito would laugh at him or that his father might question his sanity. It was because it was between him and the trees. The trees liked the murmur of his voice, his words wrapped around their leaves as gentle as the nightly fog. When he ate dinner, his thoughts were of the red coffee cherry nestled in the green leaves, not the rice and beans and malanga, not even when they had pollo fricassé, his favorite. He was back in La Finca, his gaze on the banana and plantain and guava shade trees, blessing their huge green fronds. When he examined the coffee cherries, he held his breath, exhaling only when he saw that they were healthy, that the lack of rain hadn't dropped the berries, or that too much rain hadn't stripped the branches bare. When the green berries ripened, they would glisten on his palm like rubies. Thank you.
Beautiful. Cool. So, thank you so much, y'all, for being here. And thanks, Mama, for reading. I really love the excerpts that you chose because I think it really gives us this beautiful sense of like the richness of the imaginations of these two main characters and the fact that they have like full lives that are about Vicente's relationship to trees and Valentina and sort of the stories that she picks up from the day to day, but also from novels and about Paris and things like that. So beautiful. And it's such a pleasure also to do this kind of talking with you and to grow closer to you through talking about your book. I would just love, I would love for you to kind of, I guess first tell us about the interesting role that Pilsen plays in your career, in your journey as a writer.
Well, Pilsen and what happened in Pilsen when I was 13 years old formed, or let's say, drew my calling, what I was going to write about at a young age. I read that the subject chooses the writer, not the writer chooses the subject. And I think that's very true with me. Because when I was 13 years old in school, my English teacher, who's a wonderful woman, assigned everyone in the class to write a short story. And so I wrote a short story in the class. I have no recollection of what the story was about. I knew it was fiction, something I made up. But and I knew that I was a good writer and I had talent because of her reaction and because of the students' reaction. And so that gave me really a lot of pleasure, the same kind of pleasure writing that reading gave me. And to that point, I was only a reader. I've been reading like a maniac since I first learned when I was 7 or 8. And so at that point, 13, I'm like, oh my God, I think I want to do this. I love this. And then in Pilsen at that time, there was terrible things were happening in Pilsen. White landlords were paying arsonists to burn down their buildings for the insurance money. And these buildings, the people that mostly lived in them were Mexican immigrants. Many of them didn't know English. So when the buildings were on fire and the firemen came, many of the people didn't know how to shout help or fire. And instead, in English, they shouted it in Spanish, fuego, ayuda. And during that time, I don't know that there were any firemen. There were firemen, not firefighters, who spoke Spanish. So when the victims were shouting for help, the firemen didn't understand them, and they didn't save a lot of people they could have saved. So people died. And that was already a terrible tragedy. But compounded with that, in the media, many people blamed the victims for not knowing English. I remember particularly a newscaster, unfortunately, I don't remember his name because I'll be saying it right here. He said on the news that it was the victim's fault. This is America, they should know English. And there were letters to the editors written to the Sun-Times and to the Tribune who said the same thing. Recently, I did research on this because I'm going to include something about this, I think, in the Girls from Humboldt Park. So I was like refreshing my memory. But it was just so terrible. And I remember being a teenager, witnessing this, reading this, hearing this, and thinking, oh my God, who cares? Who cares? We're all people. Who cares what language we speak? And I just knew, because I also, my family and Puerto Ricans had experienced racism and discrimination in Humboldt Park. And even as a 13-year-old, I was aware of it. I just knew one day I was going to write stories about people whose main language was not English, mainly Spanish-speaking people. As I've grown older, I realized that I really do want to write stories about Puerto Ricans. I have many more stories to tell, and that is what really interests me, because the world of Puerto Ricans and the English language are not very well known in fiction.
Yeah, I really love that story, and I especially, I mean, it's a terrible thing that happened, of course, but I think it's I don't know, it moves me especially to hear you speak about it in the way that you do, because it reminds me that you know, certainly my love of reading came from you, and much of my artistic inclinations, I would assume, but also, but all of it, she says, oh, but especially your commitment to justice. Honestly, you know, the way in which you really are passionate about using your voice and using your artwork and your particular talent, which is, you know, writing fiction, to serve the rights of humans, you know. And you just said that the subject chooses the writer. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and in relationship to The Taste of Sugar, and how you came to like select to explore this particular time period, or these particular humans who are in fact your and my ancestors.
Well, and our ancestors, not our actual blood ancestors.
Sure.
Like their family ancestors, but yes, Puerto Rican ancestors. And I think it's founded in the truth that I didn't know my Puerto Rican history growing up, and that my parents didn't know their own history growing up. Because in Puerto Rico, when they were students, what they learned was American history, U.S. history, because Puerto Rico's a colony. And the colonizer, I shouldn't even do quotations, but the colonizer chooses what to teach. And when your grandparents, my parents were going to school, the education minister, I think, was an American. So that person chose what people were taught. And recently I spoke to one of my aunts in Puerto Rico who's going to be 87 because, grandma's not around anymore and I can't ask her questions like I used to. So I said, Tia Soli, tell me about the books that you had. What language were they in? And she told me they were in English. Did the teacher know English? No, the teacher didn't know English. So the books were in English and the students were required to translate the books from English to Spanish.
Wow.
So that they could learn
so
this.
much work.
And I'm like, that must have been terrible. She said, yeah, Soli says she loved it and she learned a lot. But I have yet to hear her speak one word of English. Maybe she knows some English, but I never hear it. So I remember Mommy also would say that her books were in English. So I think I felt this lack of knowing my own history because I didn't learn it anywhere. I didn't learn it at home and I didn't learn it at school. And growing up in Humboldt Park like we did, being the first generation really of Puerto Ricans who were born in Chicago and were raised in Humboldt Park, it was difficult because we were sometimes, our parents would say we were too American when we were at home because maybe we talked a lot of English or we didn't act like they expected us to act because, the influence in the outside world and in school. And then when we stepped outside, we were too Puerto Rican because we had accents and we didn't look our teachers in the eye. I remember that because we were taught at home, it's disrespectful to look an adult in the eye. And in the US, if you don't look people in the eye, it's you're lying.
Right.
So it was very, very difficult. Didn't know. I really felt the shakiness of my foundation as my identity. And you already feel it as a teenager, and now you don't know what world you belong in. So I felt that for much of my life, and I wanted to, through fiction, learn the history of Puerto Rico. And so that's why I started with the first novel that was based in Operation Bootstrap, because that's when your grandparents came. Both sets of your grandparents came during Operation Bootstrap from Puerto Rico. But in this novel, when I was researching the first novel, I came upon this fact about 5,000 Puerto Ricans who had gone to Hawaii to work in the sugar plantations in 1900 to 1903. So when I saw that fact, it shocked me. It seemed so many people. And I asked Mommy, did you know it? Mommy didn't know. So I'm like, okay, this is super interesting. I'm going to put it aside because I'm really far along in this novel. I want to finish this novel. So when I was done, and even while I was working on it, I was already conducting research because I had to do years of it and so much. So when I started working on this novel, and I looked at the 5,000 Puerto Ricans, my thought was, what was happening in Puerto Rico that made them leave the island during that time? Hawaii is so far from Puerto Rico. Now it seems like it takes forever from Chicago.
It takes forever even now, and it's not the 90s.
And then imagine that.
Right.
So and so I'm like, what was happening in Puerto Rico? Just like the first novel, what was happening in Puerto Rico for people to have to leave? So this one, I learned two main things. I learned two events that had these Puerto Ricans really think maybe the other side of the world was better, other side for them. First one was the U.S. invasion of Puerto Rico by the Americans. They stabilized the island. The Americans changed the money. They changed the import-export taxes. They changed the taxes on the island. Everything just messed up the economy, which was already not in good condition. And then there's this huge hurricane, very similar to Hurricane Maria, that hit the island in 1899, San Ciriaco. And that devastated Puerto Rico in a very similar way that Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico more than 100 years later. So those two events the reason that my Puerto Ricans went to Hawaii. And through researching this, I also discovered the history of Puerto Rico. And to answer your question, what was the question again, Alisa? To answer your question, why
did you choose it? I mean, the original question was, why did you choose this particular era? But it sounds like, and this story, but it sounds like it was something that couldn't let you go. You know, that it's a question that you had.
I was fascinated.
And you were like, oh, I must investigate, and that you were sort of like navigating your interest and reclaiming our history through creative making.
I think that's what I've been doing with both novels. And that's also what I do when I write short stories or anything. Anything that I do, any kind of research or anything I write about Puerto Rico, Puerto Ricans, informs my work as a whole, and just adds to the foundation of my intellectual foundation, or and helps me with whatever my future project or present project, because things that I learned from the first book, I already know, and now it helps me to go further with the second book. Yeah, but this book also is the story, I think, of kind of like the history of Puerto Rico from the colonial period, the whole colonial period, from the Spanish to the American. And the way I did that was should I continue? Yes. Okay, the way I did that was to, I thought, okay, I'm interested in this subject, and I'm gonna, I have the very end here, at the very end of the novel. I got to kind of end up in Hawaii because I'm really interested in that. I don't know how long they're going to be in Hawaii in the novel, but okay, Hawaii. So then how far, because whatever happened to the Puerto Ricans, like I was saying, something in the past informed that, not just those events, maybe something in their characters, because not everybody left the island of Puerto Rico to go to Hawaii. Our ancestors didn't, but some people's ancestors did, and what? So that just is really interesting to me to kind of think, okay, what is it? And what you were saying earlier about the two characters, I think, is what helped them to decide to make this big jump or move.
They have, faith and some kind of fire in them that's like, not only do I want to, make it day to day, but it's important to, provide for my family. It's important that we can, really live, and that potentially accepting this wild offer would be better.
Yeah, and I think also desperation.
Absolutely.
Maybe desperation, and with Vicente, because Vicente is the one who really makes this choice. It also has to do, I think, with the sense of his manhood. And that's one reason why I always like to write. So far, this is the second novel where I write in both the male and the female point of view, because during these periods, the roles are very defined by gender. So I think that's very true in this, especially in the beginning and the middle of this novel. Do you think so, Alisa? You've read it a couple times.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting to me too, because, obviously you did so much and continue to do so much research, and we do learn a lot. I learned a lot by listening to you. I'm sure listeners have already learned things that they didn't know, about Puerto Ricans and even about Pilsen. But I think, you're also, it's also an emotional and a spiritual journey to read the novel. And I think novels in general are intimate, that you really can just get inside, it sort of opens the door. It invites you to become different people and to be not only like a movie, or even a movie with narration. You sort of are seeing your character by and large, right? And there's a little bit of a distance there, but when you're in someone's mind, when you're in someone's heart, when the writer is just like, painting a sort of like an environment or an interaction that a character has, and you sort of feel on edge, and you feel on edge because the character does, but you don't quite know why. I feel like the dramatic irony in this novel is like so wild, because they're gonna leave at some point. That the drought can't be good. Just things like that. And the way that you sort of like hint, and you're taking us along. I'm pointing to my heart because I really think you're taking us on a heart journey too. So I think it's that is the magic of fiction, and it's really incredible that you chose to sort of share all the things you learned with us, and to share these people, these humans who are not just numbers, through fiction and not through nonfiction or teaching a class, right? So, I mean, I would love for you to talk a little bit more about maybe the woman character, about Valentina. Valentina and Vicente are the main love story. Like, why is it so important for you to write women characters, and what do you think is like her, I don't know, like, what is she offering to this novel and to the reader's experience in particular?
I don't know. I feel like that's a question you should answer instead of me as a reader. But I want to say that I love novels more than any other art form. More than anything else in the world, I love novels. And that's why I am so glad that I'm a novelist, because I love novels. For the reasons that you said. And that's why I never thought that I could write a novel until like 20 years ago, because I never saw somebody like me in a book, or somebody like me from Humboldt Park writing a book, or from anywhere. And if there were some Puerto Rican writers writing, they were from New York, and there weren't many of them. And I just didn't think that it was something that I could ever do until I read Cristina Garcia's Dreaming in Cuban. Remember I told you that this? And that was like, I was already a grown woman, and I'm like, I'm going to try. So the reasons, and I did try. And
you did a damn good job.
And I think that the reason that Valentina is, I really like to write in a woman's voice, is because you and I always talk about it. We feel that women are underrepresented in so many ways, or they're written very poorly, often by men. So
initially, for sure.
And especially when it comes women and sex, most men are terrible at it. Terrible. So I always joke that I could give a class in that, in writing.
Yes, wait. So tell us about the sex, because I think it's very important to this book.
The sex scene?
There's not just one.
Exactly. You just said. I think that I like the writers to talk to me. And the writers to
you mean the characters?
Sorry. I like the characters who talk to me. No wonder you look confused. I like the characters who talk to me, the characters to tell their own stories. And I try to be kind of organic when I come to writing. Like, I'll think, okay, today is Valentina and Vicente's wedding day. Today's their wedding night. So then if I'm thinking that I'm going to write that, well, then that day I I'll sit down and I'll start thinking, this is her night. And I start thinking about, okay, they don't have any money. They got to get, parents don't want her to get married. She's got to get married in a couple days because he wants to take her up the mountain. So how can I avoid not having his parents be there? How can I, because it just seems like his family would be there. So then I got to think about that, and I got to put those details in. And I'm thinking, okay, there's no money. He doesn't have any money to take her to a hotel. If there was a hotel in Ponce, there's no money. So they got to be in her childhood bed. So then that's how I work, And
a waterfall casually, like it.
But that's like later on. in the route. So that, and I don't see those, they're not plot devices. I just try to think about, put myself in their place. These are their circumstances. They don't have money. It's got, so that's how I think that. I do, sometimes there are plot devices, like one that I did that everybody loves, and that was sending Elena to someone.
Oh, send her sister.
Her sister. I really need somebody there. I really want to talk about the U.S. invasion, what happened right before the U.S. invasion of Puerto Rico, how they bombed San Juan. Valentina can't be there, neither Vicente. They're going to be up in a mountain, So
to be able to use, or not use, but to be able to sort of like color this like relationship between Elena and Valentina, between these sisters. They write to each other. They wish that their kids grew up with each other. It's intimate, right? So of course they would say everything they possibly could in letters to each other, right? And it just adds to us understanding each of them, in addition to learning about what these wild things that happened,
And people in the old days, they really wrote everything in letters. I mean, don't we love Jane Austen, Pride and Prejudice? Remember letters?
Yes. That's right. And they're quotable.
So that's the thing. So these letters that they write to each other are important because we learn also about each other. Valentina also writes one of her friends, Dalia, who gets to go to Paris and live Valentina's dream, but decided not to have her point of view. She's already having a good time in Paris. You can imagine that. We don't need to hear more. And anything we learn from Valentina's letters when she responds to her.
Right. And the beautiful thing about it too is that, again, it gives us more information about Valentina, and even ourselves, as we're like, man, like this woman gets to like live this dream. Like, I'm having a great time. My husband's so handsome, like,
so
I love being a farmer's wife, right? And she's jealous.
Yes,
right? And so I love that. So it's like, we don't need to hear more from Dahlia. Like,
I thought, I was listening to the audiobook came out yesterday.
That's right. Congratulations.
Thank you. And Kyla Garcia did a great job narrating it. So I was listening to it, and I was listening to the letters, and I was like, because it kind of refreshed my memory. I hadn't really read the whole book for a while, just pieces of it. And I'm like, wow, Valentina lies to Dalia, but she tells her sister everything, just like you said. Because you kind of do that in life, don't you?
Yes.
So a lot of times you lie to your friends and you tell your sister the truth, or the other way around.
Well, and just to get back to this, I do think it's related. This question of like women and the many different characters and many different women that you put into these novels who are so complex, right? Even in a culture where they, or in like the situations where they have to be the homemakers, or they can't be I don't know, Valentina's husband Vicente is like, you can't go and like work in the fields, like that's not, a good place for you, whatever. So there are rules and restrictions on her, and many of the women, right? But I also think it's so important that you I don't know, like allow her or like amplify even her pleasure, the things that she takes pleasure in, like her beautiful things, which she needs that, she needs the luggage. Why hasn't her sister sent the package up the mountain, right?
Yeah, the trunk.
And her sister whom she loves, and the sex. I really think it's exciting that this woman in the 1900s, this Puerto Rican woman in the 1900s on the mountain, really loves having sex with her husband, because it's like, it's a joy, it's a pleasure, it's a way to get through the day. And it's like, it isn't actually a burden or something that she's doing because it's her duty, la, la, la. You know what I mean? And I really think that that's just a completely, I don't know, it's an unseen thing in a lot of novels and a lot of literature, because people shy away from it, or because people, choose not to talk about sex, and especially as something that's like solely for pleasure, right? So I love that about her. Yeah. I want to ask you one more question that was on my list, but I also want to remind folks watching that you can ask questions of Marisel if you'd like, and I'm going to get them in the chat here. I don't have any yet, right? Okay, great. Just wanted to make that reminder. But I want to ask you a little bit more about again, the choices that you're making about what to include and whom to include, right? So thinking specifically about race and about the anti-Blackness that exists in Puerto Rican culture, right? And the three characters that you chose very intentionally, very important characters, I would say, Raulito, Eusebia, and Gloria, who are Black Puerto Ricans, to sort of I don't know, like, I was gonna say why, like, why was it so important to you that they were so essential to the plot when, you're talking about this one little family? You could have just focused on this family of Puerto Ricans, Valentina and Vicente, and their, lighter skinned farmer experience, right? So talk a little bit about that.
For me, the novel is not just about the Puerto Ricans who went to Hawaii. I thought of the novel, like the frame was really the history of Puerto Rico, and from the beginning of Spanish colonialism until the time they went to Hawaii in 1903. So the Spanish colonialism, American colonialism, going to Hawaii. And because of that, then I also had to write about race and slavery. And so that's why I included it. And also I did it intentionally. I wrote Black characters intentionally because Puerto Ricans often say that they're not racist. And being in the Puerto Rican family, having knowing lots of Puerto Ricans, I gotta say that's not true. And from other things that I've read, it's not true. Everybody's racist, and there's a lot of colorism in the Puerto Rican culture, So
and the erasure of slavery as part of our history and of Black folks as Latinos is very intentional.
Oh, even now people are saying, excluding Black Latinos or Afro Latinos from the conversation, and there are Black Latinos, Afro Puerto Ricans. But getting back to the novel, one reason that I did it, we were talking yesterday a little bit about this, and I guess this is kind of like the reason. I said this, so you tell me if you think this is quite right. Or, like they're saying in the Black Lives Matters movement, when there were this year when there were demonstrations, like if you were a white person or very light skinned, you should be in the front of the line to protect everyone from the police, or to try. I don't think it worked. And I feel that that's kind of the reason that I wrote Black characters, Afro-Puerto Rican characters, because I thought that my privilege that I have, I could sort of do that. Did that come out right?
Yeah, it is about, sort of putting your own body on the line, right, in those demonstrations, but then also putting, because you can get this novel into the world, you want it to be as nuanced and full of, as many experiences as possible, especially the experiences of Black folks who are Puerto Rican who, very often aren't included, right? And in fact, we get to love, especially Raulito, who's Vicente's half brother, right? As Vicente grows to love this person that's like not the child of his mother, right?
Like I hope that if I had the opportunity to get The Taste of Sugar published, and that was never a guarantee, but I hope that if I did, that I could say this, and it would be helpful to our understanding the Puerto Rican culture.
Absolutely.
And the Puerto Rican people. So that's why
it is, and it really is. I think we could do a session all about the racial politics in this novel, because even the ways in which class is set up is by design, and the Spaniards with the milky white skin are the richest and the wealthiest. Again, by design, right? And so there's so much to say, but I really appreciate how you comment on it and sort of frame things, right? Even things that are colloquial, that are low-key racist, that people say, in Spanish, you're sort of framing it for us with your narrative voice, so that we're not just like, oh, that's what they just said, but you're like, you notice it and you pay attention. Yeah. Let me get to some of the questions that I got from our audience. So here's one. Loved the novel and the ways it was grounded in research and place. Can you recommend any Puerto Rican novels from the turn of last century?
No, and especially if they're in Spanish, I can't, because I don't really read fiction in Spanish. I read a lot of nonfiction in Spanish, especially for my work, but I don't read fiction in Spanish. But I can recommend two novels, present day, that take place in the last century. Sure. That I stole this idea, actually, from Gadma Figueroa Llanos. She wrote Daughters of the Stone. Because I talked to her and she's like, I would love to teach a college level class and teach your novel, The Taste of Sugar, mine, Daughters of the Stone, and Esmeralda Santiago's La Conquistadora. And I'm like, you know what? That's a really good idea, because if you read all three of these novels, then what would happen was you would get a really good feel of women, Black, white, and the different classes of women in Puerto Rico, and Danmarks goes maybe back to the 1800s, or 1700s.
It traverses a lot. That would traverse a lot of time.
For hers, but you could get a really good idea, I think, of Puerto Rican women in 150 years, 200-year period, if you read all three of the novels, and I can recommend them. So I'm sure they can be bought here at Pilsen Books, right?
Lovely. Tell us, this is sort of a fun question. How far were you into writing The Taste of Sugar when Hurricane Maria happened in 2017?
Well, I have to say that whether or not Hurricane Maria had happened, this book would be the same. It would have a different resonance. than it has now because Hurricane Maria happened. But I mean, the novel is based on historical fact. Hurricane San Ciriaco happened in 1899. Nothing can change that. And like Hurricane Maria, I had already written at least a couple. I'm the kind of writer where I revise and I write a lot of different drafts. So I'm sure I had already written 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 drafts by the time that happened. I started working on this novel in 2012. I've been researching it for a number of years before, and I researched it all the way through. I always research all the way through. Even when I'm writing, because I can't help myself, and I always think maybe there's one little detail that will just make it so much better, to the point where my editor had to, she was like, okay, no more, because I was, it had already gone to copywriting. And she was really nice. She sent it to me so I could look at it because I asked her very nicely, and she's very nice. And then I marked it up, and she's like, that was over 900 notes.
I'm the same way. I'm the same way as a director. And the problem with that is that I'm working with actors who are like, listen, I memorized it already. Like, we're opening. Like, I need to stop doing that because that's not okay. But at least it's just you and the page and I guess your editor.
Like, I don't know how copywriting works, but thank you to the copywriter.
Right.
Because everything turned out okay. And I just feel like, this is what I have to, this is my shot. This is my opportunity. I gotta push. You tell me, do it and apologize later. What is it that you say, Alisa? Don't ask permission.
Oh, ask forgiveness, not permission.
So I decided to make that as my mantra.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, and I think it's it's really incredible to read the part about San Ciriaco, about the hurricane in the novel, because the ways in which folks were treated in Puerto Rico, and the lack of economic support, even the fact that they were, a free associated state, whatever that means now, right? A commonwealth, like we're supposed to get financial support and protection from the United States, but it just really doesn't, pan out that way. And we're always an afterthought. And so all of that stuff is in here. Right. And also, again, it really puts us in the humans who are experiencing this devastation to their livelihoods and their families, literally the folks who die and are lost, and the trees that are lost and everything. Right.
Yeah. When Hurricane Maria happened, I'm like, oh my God, it's just like Hurricane San Ciriaco. And what was irony is that Hurricane Maria also went up to Utuado and really devastated Utuado, just like Hurricane San Ciriaco devastated Utuado. I'm like, it's just like, oh my goodness. And the infrastructure was shaped both times.
I'm sorry. Okay.
No, I was just saying that the infrastructure, both times was in terrible shape because the governments didn't put money into it.
Tell us a little bit about why, and just more about the upcoming novel, The Girls from Humboldt Park.
Well, I don't really have that much to tell because I'm working on it. I just know that it's going to be, I've written some, but who knows? I have no idea how long it'll take to write, because I'm not the kind of writer where I write with a what do you call it? Not a guideline, but a flow chart. There are writers who outline everything. Every time I'm going to start a new novel, I try to be like the good student in school. Your first day, you want to impress the teacher and you want to do everything the teacher says. That's how I try. I have a notebook, I have everything, and I start. And then I get so bored in an hour that I can't do it anymore. I'm like, I'm done. Because also, I like my characters to talk to me, and I love the joy of figuring it out along the way and the surprise. So when I first started writing something, I usually have the idea, I guess what I want to say is usually what I start with. And then I think, who do I want to say what I want to say? Who do I want to tell my stories? Like for The Taste of Sugar, Valentina, Sanchez, Vicente, Vega. And for the girls from Humble Park, I thought 4 girls because something's going to happen to them that I think would be very interesting. And also, I'm setting it in the 70s, but I'm going back to their parents in the 60s because I love to do that. And I hope with their parents to go back to Puerto Rico but I don't know. But I do know it's going to be, some of it will be set in both periods, and they both will have, there'll be riots, a riot in each period, because that really happened in not in the 60s. In the 60s, I think it might have been like Lincoln Park, because that's where the Puerto Ricans were then. But in the 70s, there'll be Humble Park, and it's basically police shooting and murdering 2 unarmed Puerto Rican men is what caused these riots. So that's kind of, see, it's all like a mix. It's not coherent, and that's okay, because I don't need it to be. I just need like the general idea, and I'll figure it out. And that's what I like. I like to figure it out along the way. I like to to think about the characters, and I like them to speak to me, and it works. So.
We're almost out of time. I have one more question from the audience that I want to also just like frame also as a celebration. The question is, can you share your experience publishing the book during the pandemic year?
Oh man, that was.
And I want to also celebrate you for this, right? For all the events that you have done, for the audiobook coming out this week. For the paperback lined up for next year. It's an incredible amount of work, right? Accomplishments and accolades, and like high profile digital high profile work that you've done, that people have really uplifted this really incredible novel. So did you have anything to share specifically around your experience this year?
Well, I have to say that I'm really grateful to Live Right, my publisher, because it's not easy to get published at all. And when you are a Latina, Puerto Rican, or anybody, and you're not white, and you don't go to an Ivy, you don't have like fancy credentials, you're not famous, it makes it even harder. And Live Right took a chance on my novel. They saw something in it. And they got it. So they've been wonderful. But it was really hard with the pandemic. Live Right was concerned about the election. So when they bought the novel just a year ago, April, and I had to turn in my revisions in August of last year. And so I had like a month or something like that to do the revisions. And when I got the comments from my editor, it was right before I was going to go to Italy for a two-week vacation with your aunts. So I'm like, going to Italy, I have to work. So I printed half the novel, and I worked on it on the plane, both back and forth. And then at night, I was at the bar working on the novel.
Same.
There was like a heat wave. I met my friend Tiari there by chance in Rome, and it's like she went to her bar in her hotel, and she was just having fun, but I was working because this is what I had to do. Because of the election, they were like, the election is just going to throw everything off. No one's going to care. And then what happens? The pandemic. So it's like 2 things. It's like, so that's why I've been really hustling to try to do these video things. And, it's kind of bad because I would love to be in person to have people, to read to people and have them to sign my book, because that's something I always enjoy with writers that I love. I go see them and I listen to them, but it's not to be. Maybe with the paperback, things will be normal. I don't know. But I would have loved to have really been able to do this because I've had some really, really good reviews and feedback from people, and I'm just really grateful that people are getting it. Because you never know when you create art if people will get it, if they'll care even. And I think that people care. So I'm happy.
We
Great.
do. And, a good thing is it's kind of, for those of us privileged to stay home or to shelter in place, it's a lot of time to read and consume beautiful art. So it's definitely something to add to your shelves and to your lives. And I recommend everyone buy it. Taste of Sugar by Marisel Vera. And thank you, Mama, so much for talking to me and for everything you
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Thank you both for joining us, and we look forward to hosting you for the paperback when things are back to normal, hosting you in the shop. We can't wait. Yes, please. Thank you again.
Thank you.
You can pick it up on our website. We have beautiful signed book plates. I highly recommend. We're almost sold out, which is great. We sold some before the event. Thank you both for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.
Have a good
Thank
night.
you.